Welcome everyone to the next edition of the Care CEO Success Stories podcast, where we have the UK's leading care CEOs talking about and celebrating what they consider their biggest single achievement. We had some great guests on previous episodes, so make sure you go and plug in, tune in. And today I am delighted to say we have Clare Connell. She is CEO of Connell Consulting, which specializes in commercial due diligence for the healthcare sector. And over the last year, Claire has done around about 70 transactions, and she'll tell us all a little bit about that. And what Claire is going to be sharing her knowledge about today is how to optimize the value of your care provider when it's maybe preparing for an exit. And I can tell you, Claire knows as much about this as anyone. So we're going to be covering a whole range of topics within that. So all the pitfalls to avoid and the difference between specialist care and elderly care when it comes to thinking about exits and risk and commercial due diligence and profit margins and all of that. So we're looking forward to Claire sharing her knowledge very, very soon. But before we get going, as I say, my name is Adam James of Spring Up PR. We help care providers get the recognition and fame they deserve via PR and marketing in order to help get more inquiries, particularly from self-funders, or recruit dream care teams. And if you head over to springup-pr.com, you'll see a whole bundle of videos on PR and marketing for the care providers. So make sure you go and have a look at that. Now, let's get straight in. So, as I say, my guest today is Claire. And Claire, why don't you start by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
So basically, we Connell Consulting is a business that I set up, and we do commercial due diligence and strategy consulting in the health, social care, pharma, sort of vets, NHS services sort of market. And we tend to do a lot of vendor commercial due diligence reports. We've done roughly about 40 in the last year. Buy-side due diligence for investors, refinancings, and for investors and operators on optimizing their portfolios. And so we work across all of UK health and social care, and that's why I thought it would be a useful thing to discuss today.
Perfect, great. So let's imagine a scenario where a care provider comes to you, they're thinking about an exit. If you can give us kind of a typical scenario. I know you're going to say there's no typical scenario, but what kind of situation might you come across when a care provider approaches you?
Well, if a provider's looking to exit, we work with them to typically to produce vendor due diligence or to do a strategic review to help prepare them for sale. And the sort of things they should be focusing on, making sure that they're optimizing their EBITDA. So if they have any problem homes that they could be marketing better or that need to be tweaked to be better positioned, sorting out any sort of problem children within their portfolio. So it might currently be a learning disabilities portfolio, but maybe they need to take it to a slightly different client group in there to fill that up. And we also help them optimize their head office to make sure that their processes are all running very smoothly, that they have the right sort of management team that can take them to the next level in their growth plan. Otherwise, everyone's going to be factoring sort of additional head office count to support that.
Yes.
We also would advise they sort out any quality issues, make sure that all their data is in very good shape, prepare the data room in parallel with our work, because that saves a lot of time on transactions, and also just to sort out any sort of legal niggles, making sure that their lawyers are preparing for what is going to be included or perhaps excluded from the sale process. So, but our role is also to help write the business plan, how they're going to grow, and so that to get the best price on exit.
Yeah, I see. So when in terms of some of the good aspects, when your care provider comes to you, and is there a first thing you might look at? Okay, what might be the profit margins be, or the reputation, or the retention of staff? What are there kind of I'm just curious to know if they're key aspects that will jump out at you first thing.
Well, I think it's just being able to look at it from the perspective of a potential investor and what they'll be looking for. Quality is obviously the first focus. If you have any homes that have, is there an opportunity to improve the rating on any of the services that currently aren't well rated by CQC or Ofsted or the Scottish Care Inspectorate, depending on the where the service and whether they're children's or adult services. So quality, making sure that they're getting the fees that they need, as I mentioned, and if occupancy could be improved in particular services, there's and fill rates on any new services, because sometimes people delay coming to market because they want to fill up their new services, and therefore getting those, improving occupancy, and having a real growth plan. So there's a growth story of how they could, an investor could take it to the next level.
Yeah, I see. And in terms of any care provider thinking of an exit and selling, are there certain, is there a length of time in service, for example? Where does that come into play in terms of your pedigree and background on delivery of care for a certain number of years?
Well, as a motivation for sale.
Well, in terms of when you're thinking about valuation of a company, where does length of time as a provider come into play? I'm just thinking of some new providers that maybe around for 3-4 years versus those that are around for maybe 15 years. I'm just curious to know how that comes into play.
Well, it takes a few years to establish a reputation, and the investment horizon of a private equity ownership can be 3-5 years. Usually infrastructure players hold assets for longer. The motivation for private individuals or families to sell businesses is often based on the age or the tenure of the directors,
right?
And whether nowadays many families may not think that the best option is to leave their business to their children because they may have no interest in and right now a lot of people are choosing to sell because they realize that the danger of potentially ending up with a Labour government who could increase capital gains tax instead they intend to.
Right.
That means the idea of hanging out for a slightly higher multiple in a couple of years may be offset by higher taxation. So they may actually get better deal if they sold now.
Yeah, I see. And what are you seeing? You mentioned talk about the upcoming election, how that might have a factor. What are you seeing maybe that's been particular over the last 6 months when you're talking about investors and what they may be looking for? Is there anything in particular that's jumping out as slightly different?
So banking became particularly challenging last autumn, last September, October. There were some processes in the UK that were delayed significantly by the lending markets. Now we are seeing greater movement on transactions. Lending's not taking quite so long. It's still longer than it normally would be, but investors are very focused on making sure the quality of the assets they're buying is good. Concern about whether a provider's negotiating their fees well, because they need to be confident that going forward it's going to be possible to negotiate fee increases in line with the inflationary uplifts around staffing costs, food costs, energy costs, and being able to pass those on to the customer. So that's a key area of concern right now for all investors.
Yeah,
we have had a difficult recruitment market, and how is that going to change over time? Is that actually getting any easier? And some people say it is. And then I also think there's making sure that there's the market will seriously impacted by the political risk of the change of government, which usually the answer is not really significantly, but it does have an impact on things like capital gains tax.
Yeah, of course. While you touched on the recruitment side, a number of care providers, of course, are battling with that. How do you see that? I'm just curious to know in terms of plans for selling, plans for an exit. So what level of influence the recruitment issues are having for care providers?
Well, certainly recruitment's been challenging in the care sector for some time, particularly since the end of COVID, when other industries started opening up. I do believe it is starting to get easier and will continue to as retail and hospitality continue to be hit, particularly outside London and South East. I think it's important to make sure that people are targeting parts of the country where recruitment is a bit easier. You certainly don't want to be buying homes in a very rural area where there's no local workforce. So focusing on locations where people do need work, like London, the South East, is always going to be difficult because there's so much choice in the job market. But parts of sort of West Yorkshire and the Northeast, it's just an easier place to do business because people are looking for work locally. There is more affordable housing. And also from a development point of view, land is cheaper and the planners welcome care developments because they bring employment to the area. That makes it a much easier place to develop new services than expensive parts of Surrey where recruitment is challenging and land is more expensive.
Yeah, and kind of just switching topic rather drastically, but on this issue of profit margins, when I do cursory looks at profit margins of care providers, it just seems to be a huge variation. I guess you've probably seen it all, but give us an idea of like what to you is a really healthy profit margin versus what do you do when you see that it's maybe not so good? Are you making very, very clear suggestions in your report saying you need to be addressing this? Kind of, and I'm thinking here of those care providers listening in terms of what maybe they should be making sure they're hitting in terms of profit margins.
Well, I don't want to dwell too much on the numbers, but it's certainly you do see the stronger operators are delivering much better profit margins, and those tend to be those that have strong occupancy and their staff are motivated to fill beds. And less of there's a limited acceptance that beds can just remain empty without having referrals lined up. And then making sure that home managers supported by head office are recruiting constantly so that vacancies can be filled much quicker. I know that's sort of easier in place like Wales in the north than it is in the south of the country, but those providers who are proactive about recruitment and have limited tolerance of agency are just going to have better profit margins. But we generally do find that fees paid for services don't vary that much across the country. And so it does come down to being able to recruit, retain good staff, keep your manager and carer churn under control are key factors in profitability, along with occupancy and negotiating your fee increases effectively to make sure that you're covering any increases to your cost base.
Yeah, great. And we were just talking before we pressed the record button on this podcast about the difference between specialist care and residential elderly care, particularly for, let's imagine investors are thinking of looking at either. Tell me something about what they may be looking for and what maybe some of the differences are if maybe you are looking, if you are a specialist or a care or a residential, and if you are looking to make a sale.
Sure. So investors into older people's care are focused on the quality of the services, the quality of the environment. Are these services future-proof? Do they have bathrooms and wet rooms? And do we believe that they're well positioned versus their local market? Do they have a reasonable proportion of private pay? Bearing in mind, you don't necessarily want to be 100% private pay, because having a few people who are NHS funded or local authority funded can actually help maintain a better relationship with the local authority, who of course will get involved if you have a safeguarding issue. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with having some sort of relationship with the local authority, but making sure that you're buying quality, it's future proof. They're in locations where you can recruit and where there isn't a strong density of competitor homes, particularly new capacity opening in your market that could impact on the services. But the strength of the home manager is probably the single most important thing to the success of care homes. So therefore, hanging on to your good managers and not losing to them to competitors is key. Within specialist care, you want robust physical environments that can withstand people with challenging behaviour and keep them safe, whether that's in residential care or supported living. And that allows you to take higher acuity people and higher fees. And you need to make sure that your staff are trained and equipped to look after those individuals. And this just makes a difference in the spread of people that you can support in your services and the fees that you can charge, because anywhere that's too low acuity, that you're vulnerable to sort of people in the future being moved into supported living. And then the age profile of the residents in your services is very important, because if the age profile is too high, these may be people who are relatively institutionalized, they're older, they may be on slightly lower fees. And the issue is, from an occupancy point of view, you don't want everyone to be at risk of moving on to the next world at the same time. And also, when you have an older client group, being able to match new placements into those services becomes more difficult, because there isn't a plentiful supply of older people with learning disabilities looking for a new placement. Many of them are very settled. And so the value associated with portfolios that have a younger age profile is much greater, because actually the younger people coming through the system tend to be on higher fees and have more challenging needs.
Right.
And therefore there are more attractive client group. And if somebody moves on to supported living because their needs change, it's easier to refill that place because there's a more plentiful supply of referrals for younger people transitioning from children's to adult services.
Yeah, I see. Great. Thank you. And Claire, another question I have for you is around, and again, we're talking about this at the top of the episode, kind of the pitfalls that people might come across, care providers might come across, things that might go wrong, things that, twists and turns. It doesn't all go favorably during the process of being on the market to be acquired to sell your provider. What kind of pitfalls have you seen? What kind of things have gone wrong that providers should be cognizant of?
Well, it's not very helpful when services burn down during the course of the transaction. We've seen that. That's very unhelpful. It also gets you in the press, which no one really wants.
No.
Having any serious safeguarding incidents that result in CQC inspections, that's very troublesome. And it has happened in the closing stages of transactions before, which isn't helpful. But it is interesting. We've had transactions where there have been deaths in services. And as long as the provider's not blamed, it doesn't necessarily kill the transaction. I remember an example where there was some press coverage of an upcoming inquest that was on our safeguarding list, and the press coverage didn't blame the provider at all. And it was actually the local authority that made a mistake during the assessment and hadn't disclosed that this particular individual was a suicide risk, and therefore they were inappropriately placed in residential care. And actually, the local authority, when we spoke to them, were very understanding about what had happened and knew it was just one of those tragic mistakes. But quality issues are really the focus on transactions. Health and safety issues also. Health and safety used to be considered a little bit of a joke topic, but the size of the fines now means that it's something which has become increasingly important in due diligence to make sure that providers are doing all the right things in that regard.
Yeah, great. And another question I have for you is around buyers. So again, I'm thinking of a care provider here, so that they may be going through the process, but they've not done it before. They come to you, let's say, for commercial due diligence and reports, and then they are on the market. Give us an insight into how it might play out for them, what they should be doing in finding buyers.
Well, I think the important thing is to hire the right corporate finance house that are familiar with the people who are buying those services right now. So, for example, investors in older people's care right now are a very different cohort to those that were investing 5 or 10 years ago. I've been in the market for nearly 20 years. And so hiring the right corporate finance advisor, making sure their data's in good shape, so there are no delays in the transaction due to the quality of the data, making sure that there's ideally some vendor financial due diligence as well, to make sure that the numbers are in a good shape before the deal, and resolve any tax issues that could potentially delay the transaction. Maintaining and updating their properties so they look good on the site visits, and vendors don't pull out on day one of site visits because the services look so badly on them. I can imagine how important that is. I've done site visits on transactions for our vendor commercial reports, and I've basically had to write fairly strongly worded emails. Can you get in touch with all these services and get them to clear all the rubbish out the gardens and pull up the weeds, please? Because they wouldn't really present a very good impression to potential acquirers. But basically making sure that their business plan is backed up by fact, and that's something which we can help on the commercial due diligence front, and is really believable. If you have a business plan for growth that looks like it was written on the back of an envelope, it's not necessarily going to get you the best valuation on exit. If you have one that's backed up and supported by all the research and evidence to show where they should be developing their services and in which locations, people are going to take it much more seriously, and that's reflected in the valuation.
And another question here I have is on the cut and thrust of negotiations around acquiring a new care provider. How cut and thrust does it get in terms of negotiating on details, and how probing acquirer may be on valuation and price? Give us some insights into what a care provider might be expecting when they're actually in negotiation with a possible acquirer.
Well, I think it's just important to make sure that you're able to share the data that supports your the EBITDA number that you're selling from. and that you're happy with the multiple that the acquirer wants to pay. Because there are situations where there are realistic price chips because something's disclosed during the due diligence process that wasn't known before. But you have to have a good relationship with the acquirer from the start and feel that they're being fair in the negotiation process. But at the end of the day, business is only worth what other people are prepared to pay for it. And so making sure that you're marketing your business to all the right parties, and that you hire a corporate finance advisor to negotiate on your behalf.
Yeah, that's perfect. So, Claire, is there anything you'd like to mention that we've not covered up to now?
No, I don't think so. Just don't build care homes on floodplains, and don't let residents with learning disabilities have access to lighters and matches. These are based on experience of transactions. These generally are important things to be aware of, and just making sure that even when things go wrong, that providers are honest and transparent about the way in which they work with their customers, their funders, to resolve problems, because any mistakes can happen due to human error. But the important thing is you give your staff the right training, and you have quality processes in place so when things do go wrong, they're caught early, they're dealt with properly, opportunities to learn from near misses are made by the staff, handovers are done properly, and basically problems can be resolved easily. And at the end of the day, quality is the most important. When providers get the quality right, the EBITDA soon follows.
Great. Now, absolutely spot on. And we all of us working in the care sector, we know that quality is what drives everything. Claire, now, if people would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Just on our website, so Connell-Consulting.com.
Perfect. Claire, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.